Hi, I'm Ken Haman. As Managing Director of the Advisor Institute at AllianceBernstein, I meet with financial advisors every day. One thing I hear expressed over and over is their frustration with how much they are juggling. The advisors I talk to are constantly trying to balance competing priorities, from managing client relationships to prospecting for new business, and of course, the tasks of leading their team. This problem of juggling is why we created the AllianceBernstein Digital Coach. This is a proprietary tool that draws on the wisdom of behavioral economics and unique perspectives from the Advisor Institute's practice management experts. In less than 10 minutes with the Digital Coach, you will be able to identify and prioritize the top needs of your practice. And armed with those insights, you will be well on your way to tackling the challenge of limited resources while positioning your business to seize opportunities for growth. Let the Digital Coach guide your journey to success. Visit abfunds.com/go/digital coach. That's abfunds.com/go/digital coach.
Welcome to this edition of Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Haman. Ken, we're going to do another deep dive on this pricing issue, and this is a really fascinating topic. We're going to talk about beliefs that advisors have and how those beliefs can actually get in the way of them establishing the price they want. And this is based on observations that we've both had when we're talking about pricing. Where cognitively, the advisor understands. They understand they're worth a premium fee, and they certainly understand mathematically that this would be wonderful for their practice. But when we start talking about it, they often sense this deep-seated feeling of threat and even resistance to this idea. And I know that baffles me. I do not think it baffles you. What's going on?
Well, Scott, that is the essence of how beliefs function in life. We all think of ourselves as, rational decision makers that are operating with almost like computer-like accuracy of how the world works and what's going on around us. And the great contribution of behavioral economics, the work of, let's say, Daniel Kahneman, or more recently, Dan Ariely, who have produced some amazingly revelatory pieces of research and observation, is that nothing could be further from the truth in terms of how we navigate life and make decisions. We are making cognitive decisions maybe 10% of the time, thoroughly hashed out, logically based, analytically rooted decision-making, the old Ben Franklin, well, there's these attributes on this side and these attributes on this side, and these cancel each other out. Such decisions take a long time, they're hard, they generate a lot of energy, and they're all done up in the neocortex. The problem for humans is that life is complicated and life moves fast and decisions have to be made quickly in many cases. And that's certainly, if you think about Paleolithic humans, if you go back 50,000 years, a lot of things happened quickly that were really threatening. The line between well-being and life was really narrow. It's not like it is today, where most of us aren't walking around feeling that our life is threatened every moment. That was certainly the case in Paleolithic times. So the central nervous system of the human being had to evolve so that you could navigate life successfully when decisions had to be made very quickly. And so the way that happened was that central nervous system developed a sense of storing experiences and creating a template of the world that allowed the human being with very little information to navigate a predictably dangerous situation. In other words, well, that's how the world works. When you hear the rumbling of the big mountain and red stuff coming down the side of the hill, this is not the time for, calculating analytically what's going on. Or when you hear the growl of the leopard over in that kind of area of the high grass, now's not the time to kind of calculate, well, what sound was that really? This is now a time for us to come to a very quick conclusion and take an action. So beliefs function below the cognitive, conscious, rational mind. They create an organizing structure for how we understand the world works. And they allow us to come to very quick conclusions about what's going on here and what do I need to do to survive or prosper in this setting. So beliefs function as an automatic information system that says, oh, that situation requires this reaction. And I'll give you a quick example of that. The most common phobia we have in terms of external stimuli is the phobia of snakes. Snakes represent, even today on planet Earth, tens of thousands of people die from poisonous snake bites in the parts of the world, the tropical parts of the world where poisonous snakes proliferate. And if you look at the human species, it served the human species well to have a belief about snakes that was deeply built in, and that once you see a snake, you immediately respond with fear. This context has a snake in it, and that means I should be afraid. It's a very profound belief. And if you, as someone like myself, who for whatever reason, I do not have a snake phobia, I actually am fascinated by snakes. If I see a snake and I recognize that it's not poisonous, I may even go up and pick it up because I find them so fascinating. So if we have a black snake or a rat snake that are utterly harmless, lovely. In fact, rat snakes really like to be held after they get used to you. It's something that I can do. And with my kids, when they were little, they were terrified, of course. I would pick them up and show them the snake's fine. Now, all of that information that happens in that moment for the human being who has a phobia doesn't change the belief that the snake is frightening. So you can get new information, even experiential information, and yet these beliefs stay in place because they grew out of either your own experiences of observation that reliably concluded this, or from other people. So as a little kid, if the adults around you in Paleolithic times are saying, when you hear that growl, it's time to run, and every time you heard that growl, the adults around you ran, and you didn't even need to know anything other than the adults are running, you have a belief that this is dangerous. In fact, I'll give you a great example of this. When my daughter Rachel was about a year and a half old, coming up on 2 years old. She was walking, but a little bit unsteady. And we were walking into the apartment where we were living at the time. And a wolf spider happened to be living in the archway of the apartment building and happened to be on the ground. And we disturbed it, and it came out in the archway. And she took one step toward it, and wolf spiders can be very aggressive when they're defensive. And it took several steps toward her and utterly freaked her out. And so I scooped her up and I shooed the wolf spider away. And we went upstairs and thought nothing more of it. Well, the next day we're coming back to the apartment, and Rachel gets about 3 steps from the arch and bursts into tears. Well, I didn't recall the wolf spider episode. So I just picked her up, assuming, little kids, this happens, and brought her inside. Well, 3 or 4 times later, she's still having this experience. She's anchored these negative feelings to the archway of the building, even though the wolf spider is no longer there, and is serving as a belief that she's in danger when she approaches the apartment. And what we had to do to cure her of this was we had to have her come in and out the archway while distracting her from the experience of the archway, and then allowing her to have the experience over and over again that the archway is no longer dangerous. And eventually we desensitized her. Otherwise, she was going to have a pretty profound belief about arches for the rest of her life. And that's how humans work. We develop these beliefs based on observations or experiences that serve to inform us how to cope with the world. And unfortunately, it works really well, but we can preserve beliefs that don't actually serve us. And that's where we get a challenge, especially in a situation where you want to change a belief.
Well, so if beliefs are really just not something we have, if they are used in a survival format, then those can't be easy to change. Just like the story you told with your daughter, even at that very early formative age, you had to go through quite a process because is it because in her mind, this is a threat to my safety, right?
Exactly. And that's how beliefs are formed. And the reason they're so hard to change is they're formed at a level that doesn't have to do with language. It has to do with observations and emotions. And so I observe this situation. I have these very strong emotions. And as a result of that, I have a belief about that context or that situation or that dynamic or that type of person. And the result of that is I organize my experience of the world thereafter on the basis of those strong emotions. So beliefs are very much like anchors inside ourselves. They are necessary because you can't approach life every moment and every encounter, every situation, and figure out what's going on from a blank slate. You have to start with something. And the problem with all of us is that what we start with was created haphazardly by accident as we grew up. Now, in Paleolithic times, what you were learning was usually pretty necessary for your well-being. But in modern times, the same function happens, even though the things you're learning may not be as critical to your survival. There's this whole period of time in your early life, and there's a period of time in the early stages of new experiences in life where you're building a set of beliefs. And this is very much true for advisors, that they come into their line of work and this is brand new to them. They've never been here before. So it's like walking into a new world. So, imagine you're an astronaut and you've blasted off to a far star system and there's a planet and you land on the planet. What you're going to do is assume that it operates very much like the planet you came from. And of course it doesn't. And we're at least smart enough to know when the context is that different, we're going to have to figure this out. And that is exhausting. But as quickly as possible, the human being starts developing their belief system for that context, and they start figuring out how it works here. And that allows the human being to begin coping with the basic issues of that space so they can use their problem-solving brain in a more discrete and moment-by-moment places. So they develop the habits that'll let them survive, and then they can liberate their brain to make the more nuanced decisions that it has to be made. This is why beliefs are so important to understand, because they are really firmly rooted. Once they're established, really difficult to change them.
And so I would imagine for an advisor, really important decisions like pricing are where those beliefs really show up and operate, really operate to change behavior. Is that how the human being uses beliefs?
Absolutely. And actually, they're not using the beliefs. The beliefs are actually using them. And that's why it's so powerful. And that's why it's really an important thing for us to talk about, because developing the right beliefs for the context you're in is really important. And that one of the challenges is you will often develop beliefs by accident. You'll have a whole set of experiences and you won't realize that you're building a model of the world that is idiosyncratic to these few experiences you've had. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I have a big team that I coach, and they are having a problem internal to the team about their pricing. And one partner who's younger, who's kind of come up from a more academic process, he didn't build his practice in the kind of hard knocks world that his older partner did. His older partner has extremely strong beliefs about how they need to price their services. And he feels very strongly that the pricing has to be highly discounted. And when the younger partner has attempted to suggest that the discounting is starting to really make it difficult to run an appropriately lucrative business that allows them to do the things they need to do and hire the way they need to hire, his partner is adamant that they would be putting the entire business at terrible risk if they were to raise the fee. And this is a perfect example of the challenge, because the partner is so adamant that he won't even attend a meeting with an external coach to help him address it. He's so threatened by this idea. Well, what's going on there? Well, it's not that he's irrational. I mean, you can say he's irrational because their services are clearly superior in most design, and he's doing very hard work very well and has done so for a long time. His clients adore him. And it is my observation from outside, with a different set of beliefs, that they could easily raise their fees significantly without any negative experience of clients. But this individual's belief about how pricing works is locked down. Why? Because early in his experience as an advisor, when he wasn't as skilled and he wasn't as adept and he wasn't providing as elevated a set of services, and he felt like he was competing with everyone else, undoubtedly he had a few really negative experiences where he was trying to work with someone and they said, oh, that's just too expensive, and they had their own idiosyncratic response that may have had nothing to do with him whatsoever. And yet, in the early stages of his career, he had 5 or 6 or 7 of these things happen in the first year, and he developed a belief. Now, I'll give you a counterpoint to that. Years ago, back in the 90s, I recruited a young person to join a big wirehouse firm. And he came in with a very refined business model that we had worked on before he joined the firm. And it was very technically elegant. And it was very much about that period of time in the late 90s where there was a lot of syndicate and a lot of new issues of stock and new companies. And he was extremely well informed about that. And he built a business on that expertise and priced it at the very top end of what he was able to price at that time. And he began firing clients who were either uncomfortable or not as consistent in their patterns of responding to him as he needed them to be able to do this work in the way he did it, which was very fast decision making. Hey, here's what's going on. I'm calling you because here's what we need to do. He fired his first client in his third month of practice and maintained this incredibly high fee set and incredibly clear business model. And at that time was the fastest to go from rookie to senior vice president in the history of the firm. But he brought a set of beliefs to the work. Now, this is interesting because I know people are listening to me right now that relate with some chagrin in terms of both extremes of these stories. There's folks with beliefs about discounting that's like, well, that's ridiculous that he'd be that firm about it. He should be more flexible. And then the same folk might be, well, but that's ridiculous to think about firing a client after the third month. All of those reactions that people are having to what I'm saying are revealing what you believe. And the question then becomes, okay,
how do you change it?
Right, exactly.
How do you change a belief? I mean, I'm listening to this fascinated and horrified as I'm thinking about my own belief systems, and they sound so important and so ingrained. How can you change one?
Well, that's been the conversation with human beings forever. And when you think about the institution of psychotherapy, if you go, counseling and psychotherapy going back to the days of Sigmund Freud and all that, that's been the enterprise of that whole discipline going back almost 200 years now. Okay, we have these behaviors in life and we learn these behaviors in life and we learn them in particular places in life. And then we go to new places in life and those behaviors don't fit very well. And in fact, they can create struggles and strategies for us. And I'm thinking about clients that I worked with years ago. One client who grew up in a very hostile environment, very hostile family, very hostile neighborhood, and he developed this very hostile defensive position in all of his relationships. Well, he was uniquely intelligent and had some opportunities to go off to college, really struggled socially in college, but did very well academically, got out into the world, was developing his career, and as a young person was being triggered in all sorts of ways by these beliefs about how the world worked. Well, he was no longer living in that world. And so for him to be able to prosper, he was going to have to change fundamental beliefs about what was going on around him because he was interpreting things going on around him and responding to them based on an old pattern that didn't apply in the new situation. Now, that illustration is what I think every advisor should grapple with. And that is to say that when it comes to pricing, whatever your convictions are, if you're finding, for example, if you're finding that you're discounting your services regularly, and therefore you're operating with a significant diminished margin, I think you need to change your belief. And if you're an advisor who is, anxious about setting fees and finds himself very anxious at the moment of setting fees, I think you're creating a belief that you should change. I'm recalling a consulting friend of mine who some years ago was on a telephone monitoring advisors as they were having conversations. He was a trainer, and so he would monitor hours of these interactions and then pull some up as examples, positive and negative. And he recalled this story to me just the other day. He said, I was on this call and this advisor was wrapping up the call. And so the call wraps up and the advisor says, and so our fee for these services is 1%. And the person on the other end of the phone is heard to say 1%. And there's a pause. And then the advisor says, well, for you, I can do it for 75 basis points. Now, the consultant is listening to this and absolutely falls apart in laughter at the other end of the phone, because what he had heard was the client confirming 1%. What the advisor heard was the client raising an issue with 1%. And so his belief was, I need to discount to keep this client engaged. And that was a pure example of belief that needs to change. So you ask me, how do you change that? Well, there's two ways to do it. The way that everyone's familiar with and rarely does, but works, is to adopt the behavior that you desire consciously and intentionally, and force yourself to do the new behavior in the context where your belief interrupts your desired behavioral outcome. So what we would suggest if somebody wanted to change the belief about pricing is that they had to approach the moment of pricing as if they landed on a new planet and suspend judgment and behave differently. And the only way they're going to be able to do this is they force themselves to price according to an artificially imposed model and with an artificially imposed script, and force themselves to do it and pay attention to the result they get. And what will happen if you do this long enough and consistently enough is the part of the brain at the unconscious level that preserves beliefs eventually gets the message, oh, I guess things are different than they used to be. I can price at this level, and it'll become a natural process. This is the way people describe creating new habits. Now, the problem with that is it's really difficult to do. And the deeper problem is it's hard to discipline yourself to do that. Anyone who's tried to change a habit realizes, yeah, it takes 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. But if you just keep doing it, eventually your brain gets it and you kind of get in the habit of doing it. Very difficult to do that. And there's wonderful anecdotes available around people who have set out to do this intentionally or have program themselves. I know what I need to do. I know what I need to do. I know what I need to do. And in the moment where this is supposed to happen, something just fries their circuits and they go back. And the belief says, no, we can't do it that way. And it's very much emotional.
You're asking me to walk around the snake because I run away from the snake or I get the hoe out and kill the snake. And you're saying, Scott, if you just walk around the snake for a week, you'll learn that the snake is no threat. And I can see the way that story ends. I may do it once, I may do it twice, but somewhere that belief system rears its head. I'm like, nah, I'm just going to kill the snake, or I'm just going to run away from the snake, whatever my behavior is. Right.
Because the brain wants to do things in as efficient and parsimonious way as possible. And this is a lot of energy that's required. The other way to do this, and this is the way I recommend to advisors, is through a process that we call a reframe. And the reframe is helping the individual redefine the situation they're in so that the beliefs that operate in that other situation are not triggered. So, for example, if you were a financial advisor and you changed let's say you went back to school and you became a surgeon, and now you're going to work with clients who come to you for surgery. The context of meeting a client who's coming to you for surgery and what's decided there and how pricing works in the world of surgical medicine bears no similarity to the way that financial advisors have traditionally engaged their clients. And so the beliefs that you had when you were operating as an advisor don't apply to this new situation. Nothing about the context is the same. And so what we do with advisors, and what I recommend with advisors, is that the first step of being able to believe differently about pricing is to believe differently about the business you're running and the services you're offering. And so if we think about, and this is something we obviously explore in a lot of our programs when we talk about redesigning your business, but the fundamental change here is if you understand that what you're offering the client has very little to do, if anything at all, to do with a traditional financial services model and the discounting that comes along with that, because everyone else does the same thing, and you've created such a different alternative servicing model, standard of care, and experience of discovery and the process of engagement, so that what you're doing is fundamentally different. You're not a stockbroker, you're a holistic wealth manager. These are completely different things, and you understand them as completely different, and you market them and outreach them completely different, and you originate and onboard completely differently, and you really redesign your business. It's literally saying to the advisor, stop, continue running your old business, build a new business, and now engage clients on a new set of terms, the frame in which they're operating is different. And so the terms of the old frame can be released. The brain can say, oh, this is a different framework. This is a different value. This is a different process. Pricing is different here. And that makes change much more easy. As I've said in other contexts, it's kind of a linear directive kind of thing. So when you were 10 years old, you used to play with G.I. Joes, and then you got older, and one day by accident you kissed a girl. And once you see life in the light of kissing a girl, it's really difficult to go back to playing with G.I. Joes. It's a linear progression where you realize, oh, I've entered into a new stage of life, and this new situation forces me to create a whole new set of beliefs. And now I'm choiceful about that rather than accidental.
That is a wonderful observation that, the easiest way, neither of these things are easy, but other than just getting that resolve, and not just resolve once, but resolve over and over and over again to desensitize yourself, is challenging. But to present your practice in a completely different way to clients so that you, not only do they see you differently, but they see you differently, can help you detach yourself from that belief system that you're carrying along. Ken, this has been revelatory. It has been fascinating. Thank you so much for this discussion. And everyone, thank you for your time and attention.